have it on the computer.
Well, they hired two people.
Existed because everything's going to investment bankers.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
I think the camera should be working now. Savvy?
Working on it.
Okay. Well, there's Dan. We got Cindy and Jeff and John and Representative Brewster and Tim and Jim.
There we go.
We're all real.
Here I am. Hey, John.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, Dan.
Morning. We have Dwayne and Maggie and Mark in the office. They were in town, so Dwayne's on his way back from spring break.
Yeah.
Winter break. Yeah. And we've got Cindy's iPad. Where she is.
So yeah, everybody.
Can't hear us?
I can hear you. I'm not sure if anyone else can.
Cindy can't. Larry,
Yeah.
can you hear us?
Everything's good on my side.
This is Larry. I can hear you fine.
Okay. All right, I think the only one we got left is Mr. Voitko. And then we're good to go, Mr. Chairman.
So she's still.
Tim's up there.
Oh, there's Tim. Sorry.
Video is good. Thanks, Savannah.
Yeah, I think I'm ready to go. Jim can join at his leisure.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we're all here.
All right. I'm going to start recording.
Dan, Mr. Chair, just as a check, I want to make sure that I can be heard.
Yes.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Perfect.
We are recording, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, welcome to the April 22nd meeting of the Board of Investments. Please take notice that this meeting is being recorded on video. First item, roll call. Savannah, can you help with the roll call?
I can. Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Jeff Meredith,
Present.
Cindy Yunkin,
Here.
Porter Bennett, Absent. Tim Kober,
Present.
Maggie Peterson,
Here.
Mark Barry,
Here.
John Milanovich,
Here.
Dan Trost,
Here.
Dwayne Iverson,
Here.
Representative Larry Brewster. I saw him, he's here. And Senator Shane Moriju. Absent. We do have a quorum. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Savannah. All right, next item, public comments. So I believe we do have some community members from Laurel on the phone that would like to discuss that project. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 15 minutes for proponents and 15 minutes for opponents. If you do not get a chance. Yep,
Mr.
go ahead.
Chairman, this is for public comment on items not on the agenda. And that is on
I
the
got you.
agenda.
Okay, so we'll do
Tab
that.
two.
We'll do the public comment with the contract. Okay, sounds good.
Yep.
All right, so is there any public comment for items not on the agenda, which would exclude the Laurel project?
Just need hands raised for anybody that would like to. No hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, next item, approval of the February 25th to 26th board meeting minutes.
I move approval.
Got a motion from Dan. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, second from Cindy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Next item, the loan committee report, which we did not have a loan committee meeting, so we can pull that one off. Next item would become.
Mr. Chairman, if it's all right, could we maybe tentatively schedule a Zoom loan committee meeting for next Thursday morning? We have a request from Corvallis Public Schools. Does that work for Mr. Milanovich and Mr. Kober?
Do you have a time Thursday morning? Can it be after
How about
19?
10? Does 10 work?
That works on my schedule. John?
Okay, we will notice a loan committee meeting for Zoom for 10 a.m. It doesn't need full board approval, so we'll get that done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you. That works. All right, next item, comments from the TRS and PERS board members. So Maggie, you want to start?
Sure. The PRS board met on April 9th. It was a quick meeting. We elected a new vice president who is Dave Galt until June when we have elections again. We approved 457 plan adoption agreements for Park County, Rosebud County, Big Sky Special Needs Cooperative. We also appointed a new chair for our policy committee as one of the members came off the board. It'll be Doug Carey.
Oh, okay.
We had a personnel committee meeting and we took action to recommend a salary increase for Executive Director Holohan, more in line with surrounding states. And even with the change that we recommended, he's still probably almost low person on the totem pole. And we will revisit it again this coming year. So we also approved EAC bylaw amendments. If you remember, EAC is in statute as a committee that makes recommendations to the PERS board, and that will now be a very small group. And John Putnam will be coming to that group, I'm sure, making recommendations that they will then take back to the board. So it kind of simplifies that. And we will be having a presentation on the experience study on May 14th. Any board member who would like to be there is more than welcome to be there. I think TRS will be having it around the same time, Daniel. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, I think they're
think
the
they're
week
together.
after you.
they're on the,
They're the same week. They're like a Monday, Tuesday, or a Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah.
I don't remember their date, but anyhow, so I'll be bringing that back to our next meeting, information on the experience studies. I think that is pretty much it.
Thanks for the update, Maggie. Dan, is there any update on any actions from the TRS.
Yeah, we had a good, relatively quick meeting back in February, and everything's going well. We went through our normal reporting and we're under budget. Things are looking pretty good. We had Executive Director Graham's performance appraisal. We discussed that. Very high marks across the board. I think we're really lucky to have him. And otherwise, pretty short meeting. That's about it.
Thank you, Dan. All right, next item, comments from the board legislative liaisons.
Well, this is Larry. The only thing is I appreciate the director providing me with information when things appear in the press and those kind of things. But otherwise, it's been a real fun day.
Great, thank you. Thank you for joining as well.
You bet.
All right, moving on to tab 2, the executive director report.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, since we last met, I did present to the school funding interim commission. It's the decennial every 10 years study of the school funding formula. They asked me to come present on intercap and how the state will address school facilities going forward. So they've asked myself and their staff to work on some potential proposals for their consideration at a future meeting. We also briefly discussed STIP and school district access to those funds. We are rolling out new AI functionality next month at the annual policy review. We're going to bring a policy recommendation that we incorporate AI governance review as part of our SOC audit, so that we're not only doing the high level internal controls, but looking at the controls we have over artificial intelligence and machine learning as part of that audit on an ongoing basis. So that'll be a recommendation you'll have next week. As I mentioned, we have upgraded security. I'll touch on that privately because I really don't want YouTube knowing what security provisions we've enhanced. Not an ideal situation. You're already all briefed up on the Legislative Audit Division meeting and committee meeting from several weeks ago. But I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. The SOC audit has started, and we are, just a reminder, this is our CEM performance and fee review year. So we'll be getting that data submitted, and you'll get the results for that in October prior to the legislative session. Likely we'll need a special meeting sometime in late May or probably early June on the East Helena Habitat for Humanity Eleanor Development Corporation bond guarantee for their new special improvement district. That's a 1,500 unit development. We're breaking trail on this based on House Bill 505 from last session. So we're trying to get all the pieces put together for that. I'm going to bring on some additional help. Our former bond counsel is now running a consulting firm. So I'm going to bring her on board, Courtney Ellis. She used to be with Dorsey and Whitney, sort of as a project management, another set of eyes to help us get the bank, the city, the state, and the developer all on the same page. So that will be pretty complex project. You should see it hopefully in early June, so they don't miss the construction season.
How much was that? 15 million? You said?
So the maximum we could support is about 16.5 million under the 90% guarantee policy, and the 10%, the exposure limitations we have within the portfolio of about 16.6, because we have 166 million in that account. Did meet again with the Hospital Association and the Budget Office on some assistance to rural hospitals after the big beautiful bill, and just seeing what that looks like. Likely have something in May or June for the board to look at. We are awaiting the experience studies from the pension systems. Preliminary results look good. We'll see with the finals, but I'm kind of excited. And then we have wrapped up our work with the Title 17 review with the Budget Office and the Department of Administration. So that'll be a several hundred page bill next session that Deputy Director Sassano. I wish her all the luck in the world in shepherding that through. Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, if there aren't any questions for me, I do have one request for the board, and then maybe we can, unless there's any questions on the benchmark analysis Mr. Putnam put together. But you do have the item D, contract approval request. This is for the construction, contingent on a notice to proceed being received by the Department of Public Health and Human Services for the behavioral health facility. The total contract cost is not to exceed $48,296,810.40. The contingent buy-sell that you've seen before is $4,250,000, meaning that we have a total cost of $52,546,810.40. We have received transfers in the amounts of $26.5 million from House Bill 5 from the last session, as well as $28.5 million from House Bill 872 in the 2023 legislative session. So we have $55 million plus whatever interest we're able to earn on that over the course of the next 2 years to finance the construction. That is the gist of the contract. There was a revision based on some feedback from Member Barry about the specific, wanting a little more specificity on item M on page 2. So the revised version that I emailed out and that is posted online is the final version that staff would respectfully request a motion to approve pending notice to proceed from the Department of Public Health and Human Services. Thank you.
I had a question. If there's an overrun on that construction, where would those funds come from?
Great question. So that would be basically by the time we get there, that would be a legislative question, not a BOI. Do we finance some sort of?
Should be through the session, should be able to tell by that.
Right.
And the earnings will also cover some of that.
And the earnings will also cover. We're at about 385 in STIP today, I think. So still pretty good yield in the short-term pool that holds this cash.
But I, if I may.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think the question is the amount that is in the contract. I was asking Dan, is that the total amount or is there a contingency amount built in there?
It's a not to exceed amount.
It's a not to exceed amount. So, I mean, that's a fixed cost for them.
Yeah.
So if there are changes, then we sure as hell hope that those are controlled. And who's going to control any change requests? Are you going to control that?
So under the way that the construction system works for us is if HHS decides they want to do a change order from the 35, 65, 95, 100% drawings, they would submit that request to us. We would get it costed out to see if it's within budget. If it's not within budget, we would look to them to find the funding to facilitate that before we would sign off. But it's a fixed fee contract based on the design we're proceeding with now. And you have the floor plans and the schematics right now.
So you would think that if you're doing a fixed price contract like the contractor's doing, there's got to be some contingency built in for them. Protect themselves, or else they wouldn't agree to a fixed price. And then I think he answered the question about if there's changes that are going to expand it. And it's approved, the EPHHS has to come up with the money.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, one of the questions I have is standard architect agreements and contractor agreements read that if there's a dispute between the owner and the contractor, the architect gets to decide. Do we have that out of there? Because otherwise.
We'd never agree to that.
I mean, but that's what's in the standard agreements.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what every city and county sign off on, school district, and that's why I just want to make sure that we don't have that.
And we run things different. Like for instance, a lot of state projects, you go to the legislature, you say, I need $25 million to build this particular building. And then lo and behold, what do the bids come in at? $24,950,000.
Yep.
We don't run it that way. We put it out, we want to see what it costs, and then the funding is the backside. So different techniques.
Yeah, but that's why it's critical. That's why we're doing it.
Right, that's part of it, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The other policy I'll be bringing to the board in May is a policy on direct real estate, saying we oppose any additions to our direct real estate portfolio. And we would respectfully request the legislature not give us any more. Obviously, it's the law, and we can't, the law says thou shalt, and the legislature passes a bill, and the governor says you signs the bill. We will follow the law, but that's a separate issue. So anyway, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
That's all right. That's good color. So what's so D and M developments? What was the process that we went through to select them as the independent contractor?
You bet. So several years ago, we have the buildings in Helena and Bozeman. We went out for a maintenance contract, basically. Who's going to collect our rents? Who's going to do our maintenance, janitorial services? At that time, we added in, and if we have to do any major maintenance, because the buildings were getting a little older, there was some deferred maintenance of some pretty sizable amounts, HVAC, electrical. We added in, we wanted an architect and contractor as part of that diligence request. So we went through it. They were the successful applicant, and we have them on contract for any project we do for, I think it's a 7-year contract, a maximum of 7 years, and this would fall within that review process.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Are there any other comments from members of the board?
Yeah, I've got a question about the benchmark section.
Let's John, let's circle back on that one and bring that up once we get through this
Okay, sure.
this item, and we'll circle back to that, but we won't forget about that. So any other questions related to the contract for the behavioral health facility? All right, if not, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I do have a hand up for a public comment.
We're gonna do the motion and then have public
Motion
comments.
first.
Savvy.
Yep.
Perfect,
We'll
thank
do
you.
public comment after the motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
I'll move the contract, the revised contract that Dan sent out to us.
All right, we got a motion from Member Barry,
Second.
a second from Dan.
Can I get a quick
there-
clarification that is subject to a notice to proceed from the Department of Public Health and Human Services?
Yes,
Alright.
you can have that.
Thank you.
Motion section. Subject to
Find us on a contract when we may get a, don't do it.
a comment from Dan. At this point, we'll entertain any public comment on the contract under review. As noted earlier, we'll do separate this into proponents and opponents with 15 minutes for each side. After the 15 minutes expires, we will allow each proponent and opponent to state their name and where they're from. So, Dan, would you like to facilitate that?
Sure. Any proponents, please raise the yellow hand. Any proponents? Oh, we got one. Where is it? Oh, there he is. Senator John Esp. Senator Esp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
For the record, I am Senator John Esp from Big Timber. When I came back to the legislature in 2019, I served on the Senate Judiciary for 2 sessions, and in conjunction with that, spent 2 interims working on Law and Justice Interim Committee. One of those is the chair. Keep in mind, this was during the COVID era shutdowns and all that came with them. The Department of Corrections was having a terrible time recruiting and retaining entry-level correctional officers to come to work in the Deer Lodge Valley. They had potential recruits that were willing to come from the West Coast and other localities, but there was insufficient suitable housing available to satisfy those potential employees. My direct experience with your board and your director, Mr. Chairman, goes back to the 2023 regular session of the legislature, in which we proposed to have the Board of Investments either loan money for or build for us affordable housing for Department of Corrections and Department of Public Health entry-level employees. We felt so strongly about the concept, we had included it in 3 different appropriation bills. Those bills were signed in June of 2023. And although there were several bureaucratic hoops and other obstacles to navigate, you and the director got those 28 units built and all occupied in slightly over 2 years. The fact that there is a waiting list for those units demonstrates both the need for them and the success of the program. Your staff's innovation in developing the program is an example for all to emulate. I know this is part of the reason that vacant correctional officer positions went down from the 40% range to the 4 or 5% that it is of late. That is exactly why the legislature and the governor asked the Board of Investments to take on this project that you have before you today. You have the expertise and the track record of getting the job done. We currently have many people languishing in county jails that need the services the state will provide in this forensic facility. Trends from all over the nation document the urgent need for more beds of this type in nearly every state. Montana is no exception, and your staff has worked out the right plan, the right path forward, and logistically, in my opinion, the best location for it. And the current working plan you are considering today will care for those people in a safe, efficient, and effective manner. I urge you to move this project along. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board, for your time.
Thank you, Senator Esp.
All right, we have Natalie Smitham. Natalie, you should be able to unmute right now.
Good morning, Chairman Meredith and members of the board. For the record, my name is Natalie Smitham, and I am the Chief Financial Officer for the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. I'm here today on behalf of Director Burton. I'd like to start by thanking the board for the partnership created by House Bill 5. DPHHS appreciates the board's diligence and effort. Your staff have been receptive to the department's needs for this critical facility and have helped ensure good communication between all state entity parties. DPHHS encourages you to approve the contract before you today so that the development process can continue. As you likely know, DPHHS seeks to construct and operationalize a 32-bed forensic mental health facility. This is yet another step taken by the Gianforte administration to turn around DPHHS's healthcare facilities and to ensure capacity aligns with growing statewide demand. Over the past several years, to meet the needs of both the civil and forensic populations, the administration has secured historic funding for renovations and expansions at the Montana State Hospital, Montana State Hospital Grasslands in Helena, and the Montana Mental Health Nursing Care Center in Lewistown, which will increase total state psychiatric bed capacity to 307 beds, with a potential net increase of 40 beds. In addition to funding provided to Montana State Hospital during the 2025 legislative session, the administration secured funding to reopen the D Wing at the Montana Mental Health Nursing Care Center. Reopening the D Wing will add 24 civil beds to serve the geriatric psychiatric population, including some patients previously served on the now shuttered Spratt unit, which is being converted to a facility for long-term forensic patients. As many Montanans know, DPHHS has experienced surging demand for forensic psychiatric services over the past several years, resulting in a problematic statewide waitlist that adversely impacts local communities. While we have taken a variety of steps to try and address this issue, operationally, our bed capacity remains severely limited, and the agency believes that the funds granted to us by the legislature must be prioritized for the forensic population. The facility would be designed with scalability in mind should the agency determine a need to leverage beds for the civil population in the future. From our perspective, it is most appropriate to build up to forensic facility standards and to be able to scale down as deemed necessary. Thank you for your time and for the continued partnership. The department is excited to move this project forward and to keep the momentum.
Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we have Ryan Osmondson.
There, am I unmuted?
Yep.
You are.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Ryan Osmondson, Budget Director, the state of Montana. I just want to thank the board. I know earlier Director Phillip pointed out that real estate development is not necessarily something that you guys are really excited about, but I just wanted to thank you as the Budget Director for the state of Montana for the work that you have done in the real estate development area. You guys have done a phenomenal job in so many different respects. I know it's not necessarily a huge piece of your entire the funds that you manage, but you do a very good job of it. It's evident of that. It's part of the reason why the legislature and the executive asked you to move forward with this project. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for that. You have helped obviously increase the amount of money coming into the general fund, which ultimately helps us lower taxes, which is one of our major priorities as an administration. So again, thank you for that. I guess I don't want to necessarily repeat everything that's been said by Senator Esp or HHS necessarily, but I just want to emphasize the fact that we do have a great need out there in the jails right now. We've got folks sitting there that have needed treatment, and we just do not have capacity in the system for it. And this facility is desperately needed. So, and I know you've heard that, so I don't want to belabor the point, but I just want to thank you for what you're doing and encourage you to continue moving forward. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you.
I believe that's all of the proponents we have for the project, Mr. Chairman. So if you're all right, we'll open it up to opponents to raise their hand and speak.
Yes, please do.
Okay, let me stop and reset the clock. And starting, Amber Zahn, go ahead and unmute. Amber Zahn, you should be able to unmute.
Sorry, can you see me?
problem.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep,
we can hear you.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to let you guys know, I'm Amber Zahn. I live in Laurel. I directly border the facility for the proposed site. We're not opposed to the facility. We understand the need for it. It's 100% needed. The siting process has been incredibly flawed, and the public has not been talked to or taken into consideration. You know, we listened to you guys talk about this as if it's going to be low to medium security, but your own law, ARM, I believe it is 37.106.1608 states that it has to have a 12-foot no climb security fence. That doesn't sound like low to medium security to us, and that creates a lot of fear and division, you know, for us as a community. But also, you know, it's a big thing too to recognize that the land that you're planning on building on has a high water table and a lot of sand, and you're going to have to put piers in there. So you're specifically engineering the facility, the building, to suit the land. I don't think we are then spending the money correctly to force it to go in this location. I think a better location would suit this and truly serve the community and the population that it needs to serve. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
All right, Laura Kirschman. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Kirschman?
I think a better location would suit this and truly serve the community and.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you.
Laura?
Thank you for your comments.
Just to let you guys know, I'll be at the front door.
Okay.
Yes. Is it working for you?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, thank you for your time today. My name's Laura and I am a resident of Laurel. I'm here today to express my strong, bold, and unwavering opposition to the proposal of to locate a forensic mental health facility in the community, and also to ask you to not provide any further funding for this facility. This opposition is not based on fear or misunderstanding. It is based on serious concerns about safety, infrastructure, transparency, and the integrity of the decision-making process. First, the proposed location is inappropriate. The site is far too close to Laurel Elementary School and 2 private schools in the same area. Placing a forensic mental health facility near multiple schools raises significant safety concerns and demonstrates poor judgment in site selection. Our children's safety must never be treated as secondary to convenience or expediency. Second, Laurel's infrastructure simply cannot support this facility. Our police, fire, and emergency medical services have already reported concerns about staffing shortages and keeping up with growing demand. These departments are stretched thin right now. We cannot responsibly add a facility that will indeed increase calls for service and strain emergency response systems that are already working at capacity. That will put our community at risk. Third, the lack of transparency and meaningful public involvement in this process is absolutely unacceptable. The Laurel City Council was left in the dark during key stages of this proposal. Elected officials and the public should have been informed and included in discussions from the very beginning, not after major steps had already been taken. A project of this size demands openness, accountability, and public trust. There are also serious concerns about whether proper procedures were followed. Laurel did not submit a formal due diligence questionnaire the way 2 other communities did. Instead, only submitted a letter of explanation that was solicited by Board of Investments Director Dan Villa, also with an offer for beer. This raises legitimate concerns about whether proper procedures were followed and whether Laurel was advanced in this process without meeting the same standards required of other communities. Taken together, these issues point to poor setting, inadequate planning, and a process that many residents believe has not followed proper policies and procedures. For these reasons, I am calling on decision-makers to immediately cease efforts to pursue Laurel as the site for this proposed forensic mental health facility. Laurel does not have a suitable location, our infrastructure cannot support the increased demand, and the community has overwhelmingly voiced their opposition against the facility. Our emergency responders deserve support, not additional burdens. Our elected officials deserve transparency, not exclusion. And our children deserve safe learning environments, not unnecessary risk. I urge you to listen to the concerns of Laurel residents and act responsibly by removing Laurel from consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we've got Elizabeth Gilg. Elizabeth, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Hold on just a second. I was having trouble. Okay, so the information that I have today is specific to the preliminary environmental assessment that DPHHS and BOI submitted as. Oh, shut up, I'm muted. Oh, it's unmuted. I have today is specific to the preliminary environmental assessment that DPHHS and BOI submitted. Sorry, this is really frustrating. There's a little bit of technical difficulties going on. I'm just gonna go ahead and read from this for you guys. Today, so before addressing the state's document section by section, Laurel Cared places the following on the official record. MEPA, which is Title 75, Chapter 1, MCA, and some other information. I'm gonna send this back with you guys, to you guys with court. It defines the human environment to include biological, physical, social, economic, cultural, and aesthetic components. Significance criteria explicitly include growth-inducing or growth-inhibiting aspects, the quantity and quality of each environmental resource or value that would be affected, and the importance to the state and to society of each environmental resource or value. The environmental assessment adverse impact analysis is confined almost entirely to the physical environment, which is soils, wetlands, air and water. The state's positive impacts freely cover economic claims, public health claims, and constitutional arguments. And the asymmetry is very obvious and not accidental. When you claim benefits, human environment impacts count. And when DPHHS assesses the harms, only dirt and water count. And that's not what MEPA authorizes. The human environment impacts omitted from the environmental assessment submitted by DPHHS and BOI include permanent loss of Laurel's only contiguous residential growth corridor, permanent loss of approximately $500,000 a year in property tax revenue that we would never be able to regain on that land. It specifically conflicts with the Montana SB 382 Land Use Planning Act, which mandates that Laurel accommodate housing growth while removing, the only land that we're capable to grow on, which is the one that you guys would like to enter into this contract to. Property value impacts on adjacent residential properties will suffer. The school district fiscal impacts from blocked residential growth, community trust, social cohesion, civic confidence. I could go on.
Turn that out.
I'm giving public comment right now.
There's 5 more seats.
I would like permission to send back with court a packet of paper that I would like to be included on the public record, if that's okay, because I don't want to take up everybody's time. Is that acceptable?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, there's a public hearing in Laurel today. And Ms. Gilg, you're welcome to submit that as part of the public record today as well. So you can either mail it to us or give it to court today, whichever works for you.
Yes, I was hoping to just send it back with him so that you guys could have it and include it in the minutes of this specific meeting. And then I'm also going to submit some other stuff at today's public hearing. So.
Okay. Are you concluded? Oh, she's on. Okay, next we have Gloria Alwyn. Sorry if I mispronounced that.
Hello.
Hello. We can hear you.
Okay, I live in Laurel and I have something to read for you. I married into a family who's lived in Laurel for over 100 years, soon to be 5 generations. I myself have lived in Laurel for 55 years and we've raised our children and grandchildren here. It breaks my heart to see our quiet town being overrun by the state to build a forensic mental hospital or a prison right across our fence where our great-grandchildren play and where we enjoy the wildlife that comes through our property. Our town is in need of many repairs and we are already unable to fix our streets, build a new water tank to meet the needs of our new subdivisions growing just blocks from where this prison would be. Our volunteer fire ambulance are already strained. With the state not paying taxes on a property of 114 acres that could fit over 100 homes that pay taxes, we will be strained even further. The lack of transparency from the state and our city government is disappointing. We, the people, had no knowledge of what the state proposed until the buy-sell agreement was already made, and it was on the news that we found out what the state was doing. And I feel that this whole project is underhandedly being pushed on us. I listened to the video when Dan Villa talked to the DPHHS regarding this property, and he compared this to Chaudere Children's Hospital and the Billings Clinic Psych Ward. That is most disturbing because Chaudere is for children with mental problems, and the Billings Clinic Psych Ward is not the same as housing insane prisoners who are not competent to stand trial. No comparison, however, that is how it was presented to the BPHHS. There is not a prison or psychiatric hospital that hasn't had an escapee, so there is no guarantee one can't escape from here. When I was just 7 years old, a dangerous escapee from Canada crossed the border and came into our little town in northern Montana. I will never forget the fear we had as we were to shelter inside our house while they dragged the prisoner out of our garage. Had my sister not seen a flash of someone entering the garage, he could have not been caught and entered our house with our family inside. This still stays in my mind after all these years, and I shudder to think what this could do to our children if one escapee, and just having the type of people near our school and our homes. My husband and I are elderly, and we feel vulnerable at the thought of having this facility across our fence. This is tearing our town apart with the chaos and fear. It has caused a recall of our mayor and demands our CAO to step down for lack of transparency and not doing their jobs properly while the state continues to push them. Our town will never be the same, and we will keep fighting. I have lost respect for our governor, who has turned his back on us, the DPHHS, and the BOI for their disrespect for our city and our people, pushing their plans forward even when we have stood up for months saying we do not want this in our town. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Mr. Chairman, we have 15 seconds left of the 15 minutes, so I'll go to Jennifer Lorenz for 15 seconds.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say that I oppose any approval of any funding for this. It's not a good fit for a community, and the funding and increase in funding at this stage only deepens the risk of the city that's already struggling with infrastructure limitations. And I will actually, can I email you this statement instead since I cannot be heard?
Yes.
In its entirety? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shelley White. Shelley, you can go ahead. There you go.
Yes, sir. And I do apologize, and I would hope you would extend this a little bit. My name is Shelley White, WHITE. I am a master's prepared registered nurse who's been practicing in the state of Montana for over 40 years. I would like to address the comments that this is much like the Billings Clinic or Chaudere. A forensic mental health facility is much different than those facilities. A forensic mental health facility treats patients for pretrial defendants undergoing evaluation for determination of competency to stand trial or evaluations of appropriateness of the insanity defense. Competency restoration with the goal of returning the individual to competency to stand trial, not guilty by reasons of insanity and guilty but mentally insane. I'm going to comment on the labor impacts of our forces in Yellowstone County. Please let me continue.
No, we have rules we have to follow. If you'd like to submit your comments,
You
please.
don't follow them all along.
Okay.
The state has not followed them all along.
Comments.
Thank you, Dan. So at this point, I think we'll allow any further opponents to state their name for the record, and they're welcome to email their comments to the board.
We don't have any more hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. At this point, we will go to vote. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Cindy Duncan here. I have to abstain due to conflict of interest.
Right. We have Cindy abstaining from the vote. Is there any
Mr. Chairman,
members of the committee that are opposed?
and Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Yes, go
Coburn
ahead.
is away, but he stepped away because he also has a family conflict and has to abstain as well.
Right. No, that is noted for the record. Hearing no opposition, the motion passes. All right. From here, let's circle back. John, you had some questions on the benchmarks.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So thanks I want to appreciate John's work in setting this up or doing it. I find that I have a question on the private equity benchmark. I appreciate the efforts that have been made there. My question would be, I think, what do we use to create the policy, and what benchmark do we use to create the policy and the asset allocation for private equity? And shouldn't whichever benchmark we use for that be used from a indexing benchmarking perspective? Because, I mean, don't you have to have, if we're using a PE benchmark to build the allocation, shouldn't we have like a PE? And I appreciate using Cambridge. I think that's great in secondary. But the question with having the MSCI small cap, I mean, isn't that kind of saying that we want small cap exposure or more small cap exposure? I mean, if we set the policy and the asset allocation to reflect the standard deviation and the returns of the asset class index that we use to create it, isn't that a disconnect? I mean, like, if we're not using that to benchmark it. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I am not sure I'm understanding, but let me give it a shot. So we use the MSCI small cap benchmark because we tend to focus on small cap buyout within the private equity space. So that would be the publicly available alternative, the liquid alternative, if you will. So when we look at it, so I'm not sure that those, I guess basically what we're saying is, look, we think we should be able to exceed it's worth it to be in private equity. I'm saying private equity specifically because you're focused there, even though we combine private investments, but we should be able to exceed the private equity benchmark, or I'm sorry, we should be able to exceed the small cap public equity benchmark by being in private equity. In other words, there should be, some excess return there, or otherwise, why wouldn't you just invest in public small cap? And, effectively, that's why we do it. When we look at asset allocation, I would say, I guess that's a little bit of it's similar, it's related, of course, as you point out. If we were to use a private equity benchmark, and Jim can help me with this maybe, but this is my thoughts off the top of my head. I believe if we used a, private benchmark like Cambridge, there's a lot of difficulties there, I guess, in terms of trying to figure out what the true risk is around that, I guess, if you will. I mean, I think to your point, you're kind of saying, like, look, the risk is suppressed if you're not valuing private equity, you're only valuing it private, quarterly or something, but regardless, essentially when you put private equity into the asset allocation models, it almost always, unless we limit it, it maxes it out, right? It wants to say, well, that's the highest performing thing. And depending on what we actually artificially in the asset allocation model say, look, we're going to assign a higher level of volatility to private equity than what the numbers would suggest. In fact, I believe usually a higher volatility than what the public markets even are at times. So we're accounting for those sorts of things within the asset allocation process. But I guess those are kind of two different things in my mind as far as what we're doing on a policy benchmark versus.
Yeah, that's my question, whether the benchmark should reflect, and I understand what you're saying, and I think it makes sense. I appreciate the thought process around the small cap and to use a small cap index to reflect that. It's more of a question as to if we're creating the asset allocation with a private equity index, saying, here's what our goal is. We like this asset class. This is what we're making as a policy and as an asset allocation from a policy and asset allocation standpoint. Does it make sense to review that with a, I guess, we're trying to fit a best supplement in there or a best proxy to fit the current allocation. But does it make it hard for us to then say, well, what was the current allocation versus the goal of if we created it with a proxy index or with of Cambridge, Burgess, whatever was used to create the allocation and the policy, how do we not review that in relationship to that as well? And I guess that's the question that I have, and I know Jim has a good answer for that. And but I think if we just keep small cap as a proxy, as a benchmark for it, it's kind of saying that what we wanted to do in that asset allocation was get more exposure to small cap or to a small cap proxy, in this case, middle market private equity. And so that's what I'm at. That's the question that I had.
Mr. Chair, could I try to respond to a member's question?
Yes, please do.
So my best answer is twofold. One is it's an extension of exactly what John said. But the second is the question is premature. It's premature in the sense that the drivers and the CMAs, which I'll talk about later in the meeting at the request of the board, are not yet decided as to exactly what they're going to be in the fall asset allocation. That's a discussion that will take place with John, Dan, and the senior investment staff in the August meeting that we have. And so, so we take your comment to heart. Keep in mind that these two things are somewhat different. One is as fine a judgment by the board and by the staff itself as to the success of the private equity program, that is the benchmark. And the other is the competition for the entire asset class, private equity, as it relates to the competition for your assets against other asset classes. I don't think it means that you want more small cap versus large cap. That's an implementation decision. It's do you want more private equity, or in your case, private equity and some additional sub-asset classes against fixed income, against equity. And so you'll get a rundown of that as we approach asset allocation in the fall after the big meeting that we have each year with your staff. So and there are times when a program is executed in such an unusual way that we construct a custom CMA for a particular asset class. that has not been found to be terribly necessary in the past for Montana because the differences haven't been perceived from the data point of view as materially different, but your implementation has been pretty good. So, as I say, my response is that is a discussion yet to come, and you'll get a clear response to that in the asset allocation prep and execution itself. I hope that's responsive.
Jim, thank you. That's all.
Thanks for the response there. Okay, so I think we've covered that. We also have RBK coming back here shortly. So I think that wraps up tab 2. Dan, is there anything else?
We've got a question from Mark.
I have some questions on John's memo here, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Now, first of all, relative to private equity, private investments, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So John's question, he did not have any issue with the private credit benchmark that you've listed here. That's my understanding, right? I didn't hear anything from it. It was
doesn't seem to.
Okay. And my understanding of what you're responding is on the private equity side, the small cap, since we are dealing with smaller private investments, right? Then what you're saying is small cap index is a bit more indicative of our portfolio than others, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, if you're going to compare, so the companies that these firms that we are dealing with are typically, buying out and doing private equity deals with would be more, if they were public companies, they would be in the small cap realm typically.
Okay. And then the small cap index that you use, that was part of a recommendation that you and our consultants reached in using it, or?
Yes. I mean, so, we'll readily admit there's no perfect benchmark here, right?
Right.
You can
have that discussion.
We've had this discussion many times. I think again, the theory here is we think that the small cap public market index, the MSCI here, is reflective of what we own were it to be public. And what we're trying to capture here, I guess, really is that, if over a long period of time, we were not able to beat that small cap public index, you would kind of have to sit back and say, well, maybe we should just be investing in the public small caps rather than in private equity.
Right.
Obviously,
So that's why you're saying anticipate beating the small cap index.
We would anticipate that over a long period
Okay,
of time.
and then relative to managing the risk in the portfolio, relative to private investments and the volatility of the portfolio, then that's where the asset allocation comes in as far as how to meet those requirements, right? Or how to manage that risk.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of considerations when we start talking about asset allocation, because we start to think about, liquidity, what are our benefit payments? We have payments that we have to make. So how much of our portfolio is going to be illiquid? We fully recognize that these types of asset classes, we're not going to be able to tap them for benefits tomorrow. They're long, kind of long duration assets. So there's that decision. There's, what do you really think you're going to get from these assets? Do you feel like you can beat this benchmark? To John's point, do you feel like the selection that we're making over time is appropriate, and that we're doing a reasonably decent job relative to, say, a Cambridge benchmark or other things? And, we're looking at all of those things. We can get into the weeds of the asset allocation model, but it's a difficult process, as we've talked about in the past. In other words, if you don't constrain the model, if you don't apply a lot of judgment and things to this, it will take you to some pretty, incorrect assumptions, I guess, or, results. It's going to give you some wild things where it will say, you should only invest in private equity and treasuries or something like that. Clearly, we're not going to do those sorts of things. So you have to apply a lot of judgment around a lot of different issues when you're looking at asset allocation, which, as Jim said, is kind of more the October timeframe. We'll start working on that in August and bringing recommendations and such in October.
All right, well, just trying to understand some of the discussion here, but
Mr. Chair, could I supplement the answer that John gave, which I agree with, to Member Barry's question? You're correct, Member Barry, that there are two deliverables that you receive from RVK in conjunction with your staff that address the risks associated particularly with private entity or private investments, but particularly long-lived private equity and venture capital. One is your asset liability study, which really hones in on illiquidity risk in the total fund. But illiquidity metrics are also included in every analysis that we do for you in asset allocation for every portfolio. And then, of course, because it is equity, there is equity risk that is noted as a volatility assumption in the CMA that appears in both the asset liability study and your asset allocation study. One that is more difficult, but less relevant because your program is quite mature and you've been at it for a long time, is concentration risk. This risk only comes up and is material when somebody is starting a private equity or venture capital allocation and has relatively few investments in it for the first several years. So I hope that's responsive to you. You will see risks addressed in the asset allocation related to private equity that are specific to private investments. So I'll stop there.
all right, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Mr. Chairman, I have one other question, if I may.
Please do, yeah.
Okay, this has to do with real assets. In the pension plan, the real assets are weighted averages between the three commodity, infrastructure, and TIPS.
Yes.
In the trust fund investment pool and the state fund investment pools, it's 50-50 between the all country and the infrastructure and the commodity. What's why wouldn't it be weighted in those?
I mean, it's a fair question. Maybe something we revisit with asset allocation this next year. It's something that we did. So trust fund and state fund have a much smaller group of GPs that we're kind of putting into those portfolios because they're more yield driven, I'll say, largely. And when we first, you may or may not recall, but when we first kind of created the real assets asset class, originally pension was also kind of a third of those things. And because we have such a wider variety of managers within the pension portfolio there, it didn't make sense pretty quickly. You could see that we were getting, and not that it's not a perfect benchmark by any means either, but we could see we were getting pretty far off the beam, particularly with TIPS in that space. And so that's why we went to the weighted average in the pension. I would argue, just largely has not been as big an issue with trust fund and state fund because they don't have, A, they don't have TIPS in there, and B, they don't have quite the broad variety of managers there because we're pretty picky about what types we're putting in those portfolios.
Okay, so it doesn't make sense to do a weighted average in those between the two.
It might. We'll take a look at it when we get to the October timeframe. We can.
But primarily because it's a small market.
It hasn't been as impactful, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Member Barry. Any other questions on benchmarking? All right, Dan, anything else under tab 2?
Oh, let's hope not. No, Mr. Chairman. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on to tab 3, domestic equity asset class review.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Jason Brent, Director of Public Markets. I'm here with my colleague Steve Strong to review the domestic equities asset class. Our primary goals with this review are to better acquaint you with the asset class and also to give you more context for some of the things we normally discuss at our quarterly board meetings. In addition, we want to explain our process, including due diligence and research, to assure you that one, we are diligent in our oversight, that policies are being adhered to, and that we are thoughtful in our approach and implementation. Yeah, without going into all the topics we'll discuss, the main areas we want to focus on are explaining our approach and philosophy with respect to domestic equities, describing the structure of the asset class, defining some of the terms used, most importantly, what passive investing is and what it's not. We'll talk about our process, some of the tools used by staff to aid in oversight and diligence. We'll discuss drivers of performance and also how the dynamics in the U.S. stock market have changed. We turn to page 3. So a few big picture items, really at the highest level. The asset class invests in U.S. stocks. Now, defining what a U.S. stock can be trickier than you might think, but for our purposes, just think of companies domiciled in the U.S. as U.S. stocks. The assets are externally managed, meaning that we hire outside managers to select securities and construct portfolios. And since late 2021, we have been all passive. Passive investing, or investments also called indexed, are designed to track an index, not to outperform an index. What passive is not, it's not unmanaged, or that does not mean that we lack control in the management of assets. In that sense, index may be a better term given the connotations that passive has. But what is also important to understand is that how benchmark indices are constructed, that is an active decision. And what I mean by that is that index providers have different rules for constructing their indices. And these methodologies decide which stocks get included and which stocks get excluded from their indices. It's also important to realize that indexes aren't static. They do change. The stocks in an index change, their weights change, and sometimes the index construction rules change. So what are we looking for by investing in U.S. stocks? We're primarily looking for capital appreciation or increases in market value over time. But we shouldn't ignore dividends, which is income to shareholders paid out by companies. Over the long term, dividends have accounted for about 1/3 of the total return of U.S. stocks. That has decreased recently with the dominance of mega cap tech stocks, many of which don't pay a dividend. But while price gains typically attract most of the attention, dividends still do matter to long-term returns. The U.S. stock market is the largest in the world, so we're investing in very liquid securities. And while we're looking for high returns, that also comes with relatively high volatility. Page 4. And I thought it would be interesting and helpful to briefly cover some of the history of domestic equities at BOI. It shows you how we've evolved over time and how we got to where we are now. Once upon a time, long ago, domestic equities were managed internally here. In fact, when Steve and I started working at BOI, for me, that was 20 years ago, for Steve, 26-ish, we were analysts for the internally managed public equities portfolio. So we were researching companies and making stock recommendations on individual securities. In 2004, the board hired a third party to do an operational review of BOI's operations and investment program. Some of the areas they focused on were internal versus external management, active versus passive, staff resources in terms of the staff size and how the staff resources are allocated. They discussed asset allocation. At the time, our target domestic equities allocation was 45%, and that was in line with peers. If you recall or remember, our midpoint of our approved range is 28% today. The report didn't really make strong recommendations about internal versus external or active versus passive, although it did discuss the pros and cons and what was needed for internal management to be effective. And that report was delivered to the board in February 2005. No large immediate changes were made with respect to domestic equities, But remember, that was around the time a new CIO was being hired. And then in 2007, the change from internal to external management occurred. And with those changes, staff, which were largely working on the internal fund, were reallocated with more emphasis placed on increasing staff on alternative investments, which were private equity and real estate, which previously had only one individual working at that asset class. Steve and I both stayed in public equities, which is now known as public markets. So we've seen the evolution firsthand. And another big change came in 2021 when we decided to move from a split of active and passive to 100% passive. And there were a few key reasons for that. First, the US stock markets are very efficient, and beating large cap benchmarks consistently has been very difficult. Second would be the cost. Passive investing is very cheap and has gotten cheaper. And last, it allowed us to focus more on areas where active management is more effective, like international equities and non-core fixed income. Any questions about anything I've discussed? Otherwise,
So Jason, in 2007, you increased diversification. Did you also decrease the allocation to US stock?
Not at that time.
Not
That happened over time.
Okay, all right.
It took a while to work that down over a course of
Okay.
a decade or so. We're still in the process of that.
So Jason, yeah, I think the move from, active to passive in 2021 has been successful. What sort of changes might prompt a review of, at some point in the future of shifting back or kind of reallocating back a portion to active management?
Yeah, I think what would lead us to rethink would have to be something absolutely cataclysmic. The entire structure of the United States stock market would have to change. That active management would suddenly have to be more successful. What we've seen, prior to our decision to go passive, obviously it had been difficult to beat benchmarks. Since then, it has not gotten any easier. So I think it would have to be something out of the realm of at least my imagination that would happen to say, hey, we need to get back into active management, I think.
Okay. So that's interesting. Yeah, I definitely agree on the history. But that's an interesting viewpoint on the future, that this just may continue to be the route to go into perpetuity. So thanks for the response.
Yep. Other questions? I'll turn it over to Steve.
All right, pleasure to be with everyone as always. If I can direct your attention to slide 5, we'll get into more details. Domestic equities are used by several pools and funds, with the consolidated asset pension pool representing by far the largest share, which is why much of our discussion centers on CAP. The other participants are the Montana State Fund, the DCRP Disability Fund, and 2 University of Montana endowment-related funds. So while this is one asset class, it serves multiple clients with somewhat different policy frameworks and benchmarks. On slide 6, for the public retirement plans, policy sets the guardrails. The approved pension allocation range is 22 to 34%, and the asset class can be implemented through multiple vehicle types. And this flexibility helps implement the program efficiently while staying within governance parameters. Passive or index strategies must represent more than 45% of the total, and small cap exposure cannot exceed the benchmark small cap weight by more than 10%. The asset class benchmark is the MSCI USA Investable Market Index, where MSCI is the name of the index provider, and IMI indicates an all-cap index, including large, mid, and small caps. On slide 7, the other participating funds have their own policy ranges and in some cases different benchmarks. For example, State Fund uses an equity allocation range incorporating domestic plus international equities and benchmarks the domestic portion to the S&P 500. The 2 endowment-related funds have total public equity maximums, albeit with different percentages than State Fund, but also use the S&P 500 benchmark. By contrast, the DCRP Disability Fund has an allocation to domestic equities specifically, as opposed to domestic plus international, and uses the Dow Jones US Total Stock Market Index instead. These differences are a function of the way each fund was originally set up
given consideration to factors such as indexes commonly in use at each point in time and the costs associated with implementing each strategy. Bottom line, same asset class, different policy context. On slide 8, we use different implementation vehicles because each has trade-offs. Separately managed accounts are typically the lowest cost option, give us more direct data access, and provide a more favorable securities lending arrangement. Commingled funds can be a cost-effective way to access scale, while ETFs offer the fastest liquidity because they trade on an exchange like a stock, allowing us to raise cash without waiting for the one-day advance trading notification typically required of commingled funds. Note that CAP currently uses SMAs on the domestic index side, but not commingled funds. The opposite's true for our other clients. It's a matter of trade-offs among cost, control, transparency, and liquidity. On to slide 9. For CAP, the domestic equities program, as we've discussed, is now fully passive and indexed. That means every vehicle is trying to track an index rather than beat one. But index investing still involves choices. Index providers use different rules to determine which companies qualify and how they're weighted, and those rules can change over time. For example, S&P has a selection committee, whereas MSCI is more rules-based. The board, for its part, has shifted decision-making from stock selection to benchmark and implementation design, including benchmark selection, vehicle selection, rebalancing, and oversight of managers. Note that the use of multiple ETFs helps when changing our size allocations, as we can buy or sell a specific part of the overall market cap range. We added to mid caps in 2025, for example. Slide 10. As of the end of February, about 79% of CAP domestic exposure is in large cap SMAs, 12% in small cap SMAs, and 9% in ETFs. So the program is predominantly implemented through low-cost separate accounts, with ETFs playing a supplemental role for liquidity, transitions, and target exposure completion. They're useful when flexibility and speed matter more.
So nothing in mid cap?
So the way MSCI defines what we would call the standard portion of it is actually large and mid together. So that portion that says 79%, we call it large cap, but it's technically large plus mid. That's just the way MSCI defines it. Good question. We are overweight in small caps relative to bench, which provides some balance against the Magnificent 7 mega cap concentration. Small caps can behave differently from large caps, so even in a passive program, size exposure can create tracking differences, which is, in fact, the next discussion point.
Excuse me, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Good question. It's interesting that there's the two sub funds, or they must be kind of small. When you look at the pie chart for the overall equity allocation, the Lubric and the Kayapao, what is a total of those?
Yeah, they are very tiny. I do in fact have those numbers for you, which is why they're so small they don't show up. So Lubrecht is 1.15 million, and Kiayo is 140,000.
Thank you.
So they are tiny indeed, but we don't we treat them nicely just the same as everybody. So on to slide 12 to discuss tracking error and what that means. It simply means the difference between portfolio returns and benchmark returns, but it's not automatically a problem. Error doesn't mean, oh my God, we did something wrong. In a passive program, some amount of difference is normal. Part of that comes from manager level factors such as fees, securities lending, litigation proceeds, or small holding differences. Another part comes from allocation differences, such as having more or less small cap exposure than the benchmark. Note that our ETF selection, which is primarily S&P based, doesn't perfectly match our MSCI benchmark in the short term, though it's closer over the long term. Reasons such as quality and lower cost underlie our decision to hold those S&P based ETFs. I'm happy to take any additional questions anyone has at this time, or I will pass it back to Jason.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Jason.
If you turn to page 13.
Can I have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
What are security misweights? Sorry.
Yep, fair question. So especially for a large cap index fund, the provider will typically try to match the benchmark exactly. They're going to own all the same stocks and all the same weights. For smaller cap index funds, sometimes, especially for some of the smallest names that make up only a small portion of the benchmark and have low liquidity, it is not cost effective for the benchmark provider to try to match those exactly. So what they will do typically is own maybe a larger portion of another name that has, they'll do statistical analysis to see, what other stock that has better liquidity has similar characteristics and whatnot. So it's, especially on the domestic side, it is very modest, but it is something that does occur, and it's typically in the smallest and least liquid names.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Turn to page 13. So one of the things I frequently mention at our quarterly board meetings is the dominance of mega cap growth stocks that we've seen over recent history. You've heard repeatedly about the FANG stocks, the Magnificent Seven, and so on. But I thought it'd be helpful to provide some actual details to better illustrate just how dramatic these changes in the US stock market have been over the last decade or so. So this slide shows the S&P 500 sector weights compared from the end of 2015 to 2025. And what we've seen is a dramatic change in the composition of the index. Technology, which was the third largest sector in 2015 at around 14%, is now the largest sector at around 34%, with the next largest sector being 21% smaller. So I've said before at meetings that if the S&P 500 looks more like a growth stock index, then this is kind of what I mean when I refer to that. Page 14 shows how the characteristics of the S&P 500 have changed. I mentioned earlier how the impact of dividends has decreased. You see that in the dividend yield, which has dropped the last decade. I also point out quality. So in stock market terms, company with high returns on equity and high profitability are considered higher quality. And many of these mega cap companies that have dominated have very high returns on equity. They're very profitable, which you see in the table above how that has changed. I mentioned at just about every quarterly board meeting how the S&P 500 has gotten more concentrated. We see that in the table in the weight of the largest 10 stocks in the index, which is now around 40%. And we see how much larger both the index has gotten. You see that in the weighted average market cap, as well as the largest stock, which now is around $4.5 trillion.
Hey, Jason, I have a quick question. So I know we've talked about this before, and I think the answer is probably still the same, but in light of what you just talked about with the changes in the S&P 500, have we ever considered being able to split that into something like growth versus value so that we have one more lever to pull? And, maybe the neutral weighting is to be precisely the same as the market, but it would give us an opportunity to either take advantage of an opportunity or maybe take off a little bit of risk if we felt like we could. Any thoughts to that?
And that aspect, I think, generally speaking, timing growth versus value is really difficult. And I'm not saying we're not smart, but I don't know that that would be something we would think the odds would be tilted in our favor to be able to time those, because I would imagine 5 years ago we'd say, oh gosh, we got to be, look at how growth is done. We would put more into value, and that would not have helped. So not that it's not something that we haven't thought about, but I just think that's generally speaking, that's something that very difficult to do consistently, and not something and that's for anybody. So.
Fair. Thank you.
Turning to page 15, so we mentioned how index providers have different methodologies for constructing their benchmarks in large cap indices. Those differences are relatively minor, but where we see larger differences are on the small cap indexes. And this slide shows some of the differences both in the composition and the returns of 3 separate small cap indices: the MSCI USA Small Cap, the S&P 600, and the Russell 2000. Now, we use MSCI benchmarks for our public equities, and our small caps are benched to the MSCI Small Cap Index. But we also have small exposure to the S&P 600 through an ETF. When comparing these benchmarks, looking at the characteristics, I point to a few things.
Could you define this SP 600? What is the actual definition? So what is that exactly?
So the broadly speaking, the more broader index for S&P is the SP 1500.
Yeah.
And they divide that, the large cap, into the largest 500.
Got it.
Mid cap is the next 400, and then the small cap is 600.
Thank you.
So in comparing the characteristics, the S&P small cap looks roughly similar to the S&P 600, except for the market cap size and the number of stocks. The MSCI index is quite a bit larger than both the S&P 600 and the Russell 2000. We discussed quality, and like we did with the S&P 500, if we use return on equity and net margins as measures of quality, the Russell 2000 appears to be lower quality. And a large driver of that is that roughly 40% of the Russell 2000 companies are unprofitable. In contrast, the S&P 600 has a profitability screen, which eliminates unprofitable companies from consideration. The MSCI also tends to be higher quality than the Russell 2000, which I think comes from being in slightly larger companies and also due to some sector differences between the two. The question is, do these differences affect returns? So looking at the performance table at the bottom, we see that the Russell 2000 tend to lag the other two over the long term. It doesn't always underperform in shorter time periods. We see how the Russell 2000 has outperformed the S&P 600 over the last 1 and 3 years. Some have referred to that as a low quality or a junk rally. And going back to the meaning of passive investing, passive does not mean that we don't make active decisions. We used to use a Russell 2000 ETF, but switched to the S&P 600 ETF, partly due to cost. The S&P 600 ETF was cheaper, but also to the quality factor and how a little bit higher quality has tended to outperform over time.
Have you seen flows into the different indices? I mean, like what is the flow into the SP 600 versus the Russell, and overall, is there momentum going into small cap right now, or more money?
I haven't seen the flow numbers. I have to look. The small caps have done better over the last quarter and relatively last year, but I'd have to dig in deeper to see the actual flows into index mutual funds and ETFs. Other questions? I'll turn it back to Steve, who will discuss our process and performance.
All righty, on to slide 16. Even though this is a passive program, our oversight work is still rigorous. Passive investing is low discretion only in terms of security selection. It does not, in fact, mean set it and forget it. We use the same manager evaluation framework that we use with active managers, including investment guidelines, scorecards, quarterly reviews, quantitative analysis, and on-site visits. We also use industry tools such as FactSet, Bloomberg, and eVestment, along with manager trading platforms to help control cost, review operational controls, monitor portfolios, evaluate implementation, and support efficient trading and cash flow activity. And on to slide 17. This is just kind of a slide that brings together our ownership and results for the various clients. As of the end of February, the combined domestic equity assets shown here total over 4.7 billion, with pension assets again representing the large majority, as we've discussed. On performance, results are generally close to benchmark, which is what we would expect in a passive program and is typically how we would characterize success in such a framework. The differences we see across periods are consistent with the implementation factors we discussed earlier, such as fees, securities lending, and differences in allocation or benchmark structure. And do note that anything that says NA just reflects a limited history for those funds. Happy to answer any other questions, or I will toss it back to Jason one more for summary.
So hopefully you've come away with a little bit better understanding of the domestic equities asset class. But most importantly, we wanted you to hear some of the history of the domestic equities asset class. It shows how we got to where we are now. And more generally, hopefully you learned what we do, how we do it, why we do it that way. We discussed passive investing, which is obviously an important concept for us, and also to explain what passive investing is not. And last, to explain to you our oversight and monitoring asset class, and to ensure that we're diligent and thoughtful in how we approach asset class constraints and the policies. Any other questions for me or Steve?
Any questions? All right, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, move on. Let's move on to tab 4. So the RVK annual capital market assumptions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. When you're managing as much money as the board does, it goes without saying that it's extremely helpful to have a plan. Mike Tyson said, plan only lasts as long as till you get punched in the face. But General Eisenhower said, planning is essential. And if I'm going to choose a mentor, I'm going to choose General Eisenhower over Mike Tyson. And in many ways, capital market assumptions are like a map. They lay out your best estimation of the future being up to 20 years. Because every time you try to manage a portfolio for the short term, it has proven to be a losing strategy. And so there has to be some kind of general direction, such as I often use the example of, since I live in Oregon, the folks leaving in covered wagons from St. Louis, heading out to the Oregon Trail, and having the most rustic of maps, but they did have maps and they did point the general direction. They didn't have a lot of granular detail. I know this because I used to collect maps and I had a garage full, but it led to marital discord, so I had to discontinue that hobby. Let me talk a little bit about how capital market assumptions work and how they create a plan, a map for thinking about how to construct your portfolio. So I'm on page 1, and with respect to application, as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, we'll be conducting another asset allocation study in conjunction with Dan, John, and staff later this year. And the capital market assumptions are the map on which that analysis rests. We're humble about knowing how accurate they can be. So we spend a lot of time thinking about them, revising them annually. We have a very detailed process. And I'll talk a little bit about what accuracy means when we talk about capital market assumptions. But the key thing that we want to do is actually run a competition between asset classes for allocations of the board's assets, or the assets that are under the purview of the board, particularly CAP we're talking about, but it applies across the board to pretty much all types of funds that you manage. So we take into account things like subjectively set maximums and minimums, where we think that we just can't imagine a portfolio having less equity than this or having more than that, just to use an example. And we also try to gauge as a fiduciaries, your risk tolerance. And so that's one of the reasons why, as I mentioned earlier to an earlier question, that you will see not just sample allocations and recommended ones or A1 from ourselves at RVK and your staff, but you will also see risk characteristics associated with each one of them so that you can gauge how they comport with your sense of how much risk you're willing to take with the assets that you oversee. So I'm on page 4 at this point, and I mentioned before that we do this every year, and the reason for that is while we don't like tactical investing, we need to essentially revisit our map forward, our forward-looking vision each year, because sometimes things have changed a lot, sometimes they don't change very much. Example, in many years, our capital market assumptions only have very marginal changes because nothing has happened in the previous year that would cause a change in the forward vision. There are several other examples where, for example, COVID or the GFC hit, where in the space of a very short period of time, the structure and the valuations in the capital markets change so radically that they require a change in the forward vision because the starting point has changed so significantly. And this is why we go through this exercise every single year to test that assumption. I'm on page 5 now, and I want to talk a little bit about accuracy, because this is something that is very important to appreciate. When you think about capital market assumptions as it applies to whether asset liability studies or asset allocation studies, there's 2 types of accuracy. One is relative accuracy. It's the most important. And what do we mean by that? What we mean by that is getting 1 or 2 of the assumptions dead on, but the other ones quite off kilter is not very good, because these CMAs set the stage for that competition between asset classes to gain your assets. And that competition only works if the CMAs for each asset class bear reasonable resemblance to one another. So for example, if we were to raise our estimate, just a thought experiment, for inflation by, say, 2 percentage points, which is a lot, but we said, oh, fixed income is going to do great. That doesn't pass the smell test, because we know when inflation goes up, fixed income values go down. And so, this relative accuracy is the most important thing. But what about absolute accuracy? Isn't it also important to try to get it right? Well, the answer is yes, but in a different context. So for example, if we were to, and we've done studies on this, raise our assumptions across the board, we would still, but keep them relative to one another, we'd still get the same asset allocation recommendations. But we would give a misleading signal to, say, for example, your legislature about how much room there might be should they want to raise benefits. Not that we're recommending that, that's not in our purview, but we would be giving a misleading signal if we didn't also try to get absolute accuracy correct. It also goes back to the issue of, we talked earlier about illiquidity, because if we get surprised on the downside because we've been too optimistic about values across all of the asset classes, we could in fact trigger an illiquidity issue in the portfolio. So absolute accuracy matters, but relative accuracy is what drives the asset allocation opportunities that emerge in an asset allocation study. Any questions about this concept? Because this is a tough one to get our heads around. If there are no questions, Mr. Chair, I'll proceed to page 5. Go ahead.
Yeah, please do proceed. Yep.
Okay. So on page 6, we want to give a sense of, are we in a period of time where our CMAs that we are using, our 2026 ones, which we published at the end of January, not that long ago, are they cautionary versus our previous estimates of estimates of return risk and correlation, particularly return in this case? And how do they compare to the historical range that we've experienced in the market? And the answer, as you can see by the black dots, is this is a cautionary time. That's the signal that we're sending through our CMAs. We want to both on an absolute basis, but also pretty much across many of the asset classes, as you see below in the panel below, that this is a time, particularly in equity, when it pays to be cautious. Simply because, as we've talked about in past board meetings, valuations are at historically high levels certainly for U.S. equities, and after the terrific outperformance of international equity in 2025, it's edging in that direction even for international equity. Fixed income is pretty much in the range that we'd expect it. Core real estate has taken a beating, but is now kind of in the middle of its range. So, but in total, what we're trying to do here is to signal that this is a cautionary period, and expectations should, going forward from this point, should be muted if historical trends are applicable. And we're going here by the numbers, not by the seat of our pants.
Jim,
yeah.
Before you move on, I appreciate this. I was a little confused when I saw the slide. The range in blue and the different colors, that's prior RVK estimates. Is that correct, or am I mistaken?
That's the lower panel.
Pardon, one more time.
That's the lower panel on page 6. The upper panel shows the max and min of a 20-year period dating back to 1926, just to show you how big the ranges can be for equity. You just heard Jason say that the equity asset class is the most volatile asset class. This is a classic example or illustration of that. Is that responsive enough?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem.
Hence, the bottom chart shows your caution, or caution might not be the right word, but
it shows where we are versus this dates back to 2007 when we started doing very disciplined. So this is about 20 years worth of disciplined annual issuance publication of CMAs. It shows where we are versus that series. And it shows that of all of those years, certainly for equity, we're at the lower end of the range. For fixed income, we're kind of in the middle, just to give you an example.
Appreciate that.
And I think there's an important message here, because there is a tendency among some investors to want to be more tactical. You know, they read a story about something happening in the Wall Street Journal and they want to change the asset allocation. That has been a losing proposition, but it doesn't mean that asset allocation driven off CMAs is a fire and forget situation. As you can see, over the last 20 years or so, our CMAs have actually varied a lot depending on the year in which we crafted them. So, for example, if you go back to the GFC at the bottom, our CMAs rose dramatically. On the other hand, currently they're toward the very bottom of the range because we've had a number of years of just excellent U.S. equity performance. So this is we don't like the word tactical, but in some respects, by doing this annually, we're embedding a certain amount of valuation sensitivity, you can call it tactical thinking, in our CMAs and therefore in our asset allocation analysis. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
So if we look at page 7, this essentially embeds a sense of how much uncertainty surrounds the estimate that we would have for returns in our CMAs currently. And going back again to Jason's comment about equity being the most volatile whether it's month to month, whether it's year to year, asset class, you can see the blue bars stretch far left and right, and actually, encompass some of what we would call tail events when COVID hits or GFC hits, or the Fed suddenly turns around and starts lowering rates and the market takes off. So, we have to be humble about the fact that while we have a point estimate that you see in that black circle in the middle, that some asset classes, there's likely to be very little variation around that expectation. And in other asset classes, they're just by its very nature going to be a much broader array of possibilities that could emerge. So I hope that comes through, and it is accounted for in our asset allocation analysis by essentially penalizing those higher volatility allocations or asset classes to create what we call geometric returns, which include the penalty associated with high volatility. The math of a stream of returns is such that the more volatile it is over a period of, say, 10 or 20 years, the lower it's going to be. Simply because, as you've heard often, if the market goes down 50%, just to use an example, it has to go up 100% from that point in order to just get back to even. And that's why volatility carries a return penalty associated with it over a number of years. And by the way, when you see our asset allocation analysis, you will see both what we call arithmetic, meaning not risk adjusted, annual assumptions. You will see geometric assumptions, or compound assumptions is another name for them. And you will see those, and those have that volatility penalty embedded in them, and you will see them side by side. So let's turn to page 8. And thank you for driving the slides. I appreciate it. I get to focus on thinking more about what I want to say here. There are any number of themes in a given CMA issuance that we do of January and every year. This year, some of the more important ones that have always been, at least in recent years, topics of heated conversation, both inside RVK, within the institutional investment community as well. One is inflation. We decided to keep our inflation, despite the fact that at the time we published it, inflation was coming down steadily. We decided to keep it at 2.5%, 50 basis points above what the Fed's goal is. And the reason for that is we observed how sticky inflation was proving to be. We did a subjective analysis, but an analysis nonetheless about the kinds of things that would keep it higher than the Fed's goal. And we decided to not move it down to where the Fed's ultimate goal is over this forecast period, which stretches as far as 20 years. The second thing is we lowered our equity assumptions over the next lengthy period. And the reason is mean reversion. Mean reversion is something that is very, very important when you think about a baseball player who's been for a long period of time and just seems to be a 250 hitter. If he starts out hitting 300 in the first month of the season, odds are pretty likely he's going to revert to his normal batting average that's been exhibited over a long period of time. Returns exhibit in market history very much the same pattern. They revert toward a long-term average. We just don't know how fast, and we don't know if it'll be in big chunks like it was during COVID and the GFC and the tech telecom crash, or whether it might take place over a 10-year period, a little bit at a time. No one has proved to be very good at timing this. So our mean reversion assumption assumes, for lack of a better term, that it occurs equally over the forecast period. In point of fact, in our experience of the last 20 years, it has tended to revert toward the mean faster and in lumpier fashion simply because of events over this period of time. But those events were not predictable, like COVID, like the GFC, and so on. And the last point that I think I'd make about this year's capital market assumptions is that, and you've heard this from us and from your fixed income staff, yields are reasonable, but spreads are very, very tight. And those are reflected very directly in the assumptions that I'll show you on the next page. Because in the case, as I will show you in a moment, of fixed income, yield spreads tend to also move toward, revert toward means over time, but in an unpredictable path. And but yields, particularly for medium and long-term duration, are very stable, and you almost can predict that you'll get what you get if you buy a 30-year bond. So let's move to page 9.
Jim, I think John had a question.
Yeah, Jim, sorry, just would love to hear your guys, when you did the inflation analysis, I'm sure there was some thought, and we always hear, you know, such a news item, is what did you assume, or what was your thinking around, say, AI deflationary, or what, you know, I'm sure you guys discussed that quite a bit, and it'd just be interesting to hear a little bit of your thought there.
Yeah, and there are several things that in market history and in financial economics would tend to push inflation down. And I'm not talking about a short-term business cycle like a recession. I'm talking about things like a major increase in productivity that could come from AI. Also, rising debt levels that can depress growth and make for lower inflation. But there are, as always, there's a counter argument too. One of them is we're seeing pressures on global trade, not just from tariffs, but from other geopolitical reasons. And global free trade has a strong tendency to push down inflation. So we discussed all of those things, and we concluded that we weren't prepared to assume that inflation was going to move down and to the Fed's level so far, and the sample size is tiny since we published it. Inflation has actually ticked up a little bit for reasons that may be temporary. But the other thing that we did, Member Milanovic, is we did lots of scenario analysis. So we said, let's take 20 years and let's assume that the Fed does get inflation down to 2%, but it takes 7 years or it takes 5 years, and then it stays there. Well, it turns out that those first 5 to 7 years add 50 basis points to the long-term average for inflation. So we've tried to come at it from every angle we can think of. If you can think of other ones, we're happy to consider them.
No, you guys are the experts. That's why I wanted to hear. I think it's really brilliant.
So I'm not going to go through, we're on page 9 now. I'm not going to go through every one of these. I've mentioned the big changes, but as you can see, if you look at the far right-hand panel, you'll see the change in our 2026 capital market assumptions versus 2025. And what you'll see there is a lot of pink. Not completely so, but a lot. And that reflects what I mentioned earlier, that with valuations really high, spreads really tight, an improvement significantly in the returns in international equity, we're edging toward the cautious side. It's not we like this asset class or we don't. That's crazy. You have to put money somewhere, and you have to have a diversified portfolio. What it means is more likely, if I could use a metaphor, and I know I use a lot of them, if you ever watch a video of America's Cup race what you'll see is the skipper is constantly telling the folks manning the sheets to trim the sheets, to let them out a little bit, to trim them a little bit, to let them out a little bit. And this is very similar to the changes that we like to make in our CMAs, since they create the backbone of an asset allocation analysis. We don't want to make big bets unless the market has told us that one is needed. And it rarely does, but it does happen, as I've mentioned a few examples before. So these are the assumptions that we're going to be discussing with your staff in our big August meeting, which, by the way, is a terrific meeting. And I want to say how much RVK appreciates the effort that Dan, John, and the staff make to have that big meeting. And I think that they would agree with me that it is an incredibly robust discussion. And we bring a lot to the table, but they also bring a lot to the table. So really appreciate that. If there are no questions, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move on to a bit of a sensitive topic, and that is on page 10.
Any questions for Jim? Yeah, please continue.
So page 10 might to some people think is a little bit disturbing, because you have an assumed rate of return for the long run set by your actuary and your pension boards of 7.3%. And none of the asset classes, with the exception of private equity, actually top that. And of course, as John discussed earlier, you can't load up the portfolio with private equity just to try to hit each year the 7.3% number, because the board has to balance the protection of the assets that are there to fund the majority of future benefits versus the need to grow those assets to cover liabilities that grow over time. And that balance has to be struck periodically and restruck again and again. And right now, we would say that there is a reasonable case to be made to lean toward the protection of the assets you have, not entirely, because you still have considerable growth allocations in the portfolio. But if that doesn't hit 7.3% every year, there's a good reason for that. Now, there may be other times when you want to lean heavily toward growth because the market is giving you that opportunity, and then it can go the other way. But right now, this is the picture that you have. And keep in mind that 7.3% is a number that is set by the actuary and is tied directly to their estimate of the actuarially determined contribution rate. It's not an investment number per se. You choose the investment target every single year when you do an asset allocation. And it is driven by this balancing that we've just talked about, and your sense of risk versus reward. And so this is an important concept to wrap your head around.
Can I ask a couple questions on that, John, of our staff here? So
happy.
I'm here saying this, and it's a lower return expectation across the board, right? What's our return running, or what did it run last year?
9.294. I don't remember the exact number.
Even
it was
in
9 here. Let's see.
Year to date, we were above 9.
Year to date, we're at almost 10.
Okay, so we're looking at lower assumptions here, but our return has been beating the 7.3 expectation on the actuarial hurdle, right?
Can't believe. So last year, our net return for PERS was 11.7.
Okay.
Over 3 years, it was 10.6.
Okay, so these RBK is coming in with some lower assumptions, but you've been beating those assumptions. Because last year they were lower as well.
So this gets back to, and maybe I'm wrong on this, so forgive me if I am, but there's this tendency to draw a direct correlation between the capital market assumptions and the actual returns of the portfolio. And there's a lot of decisions below.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying there's a direction here.
Yeah.
And does the pensions actuary, they come up with their actuarial return, right?
Right.
That's not
Correct.
something that we control or we have any influence over.
Correct.
And they're probably not gonna reduce their assumption here.
Well, they very well could. I think the assumption is the 7.3 is not just based on capital market assumptions, but broader, okay, what's our mortality tables? What's all of those other inputs help to feed and drive the capital market the capital market assumptions are part of the recipe that they write for their respective points. I would suspect that there may be some downward pressure on the long term. I think from our perspective, we have a portfolio that is exceeding the actuarial hurdle. I think our inception to date is somewhere around 7.89, which is 3 different iterations of hurdle passed.
Well, I guess that's my point. We're looking at some assumptions on the capital market assumptions, and I understand that it's all part of your discussion that's going to occur later on this summer about asset allocation, all that sort of thing. But we are beating the actuarial hurdle, so you shouldn't get too excited about seeing a lower assumptions at this point. We can still manage.
The Teachers Retirement System Board and the PRS boards actually set the assumption for those plans. We do get input from the actuaries, and we obviously look at things like these capital market assumptions. The actuaries can give us ideas of what other pension plans are doing, but those numbers are actually set by the boards.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that Dan said, and that is you should not put an iron bar between CMAs and your expected rate of return. And there are several reasons for that. One is that, remember the CMAs, and when I talked about relative accuracy, their key job is to set a good asset allocation. It's not to hit the expected rate of return. It's to set a good asset allocation. And it's essentially like you're building a net to troll through the ocean of the capital markets to capture returns. This fund has been very successful in building that net using our capital market assumptions over the years because the relative accuracy has been pretty reasonable. And it has created an asset allocation along with the input from your staff that has allowed you to actually exceed that 7.3%. Also, CMAs have no return associated with better than average performance in the asset class. They're just index based. So that's another reason why they are conservative. But again, their job is not absolute accuracy is less important than relative accuracy, because the most important thing is building that asset allocation. And that's what these do. Now, if you were to ask me a different question that hinged on absolute returns and their importance, say, for example, and this is true in a number of states right now because funding ratios have improved. We're seeing proposals emerge for significant benefit increases because of improved or higher COLAs, because funding ratios have improved because of good markets the last 3 years, really good markets. And we would say, that's not our business as to whether or not you want to raise benefits, but you should look at the absolute levels going forward, because when you raise benefits, you are essentially saying, I'm creating a debt that's owed, and then I'm going to pay for it out of returns from the portfolio going forward. So that's where the absolute level does come into effect. But if we were to lower or raise all of these proportionately, what we would want to see is a good asset allocation, and it would be roughly the same one that you would use to attack the capital markets to try to get returns. Does that make sense?
Got it.
I guess one thing I would add, Mark, is the board has given us a range around where we set the midpoints, right? Now, it's a big super tanker in terms of if we're talking about the pension fund, but we do, you know, as we've talked about in the past, you know, as we recognize the staff that, hey, domestic equities had a great run, or more recently, international equities had a great run. So when I'm walking down the hall to pay benefits, or maybe just because I'm being a little extra cautious, as maybe more recently taking a little bit of money off the table. Now that's not huge. It's not moving dramatically within the range, but you know, we can be a little underweight or a little overweight. And you know, some of that, I'm oftentimes less concerned about whether that works out in terms of the attribution that Aaron's showing you, as I am saying, well, I'm going to take a little off the table because you know, things are very high and I know I need to pay benefits or whatever, and it may or may not work out. But I think over the very long term, you know, we're not oblivious to those things. We do this annually. We reset our asset allocation, which is, I'd say most of our peers only do it maybe every 3 to 5. So we react a little quicker, not with lightning speed by any means, but hopefully over time, you know, as Jim has pointed out, these assumptions are sort of a snapshot in time, and you're expecting these returns over basically a very long period of time, but then next year COVID happens and all of a sudden, everything shifts very quickly, and we, hopefully will at least react to that in some way, shape, or form, and or stay the course. Oftentimes, quite honestly, our biggest benefit most of the time has been not reacting to big drops in the market and having the wherewithal to see our way through that, come out the other side, and it's sort of pain on paper, but it's not pain that we actually realize losses oftentimes. So lots of ways to navigate this over time.
Yeah, John raises a great point, which is an additional opportunity to exceed the index-based CMAs that we use to create the asset allocation. And that is a well-executed rebalancing policy over the course of 10 years can not only add to returns, but it can also reduce risk. And depending on how much volatility there's been and how effective the rebalancing has been, it can be modest or it can be significant. So yeah, people that connect, as Dan said, these CMAs directly with the assumed rate of return are missing, 8 or 10 important points in the conversation. So, Mr. Chair, I'm almost done. This has been great. I don't want to overstay my welcome. I just have a few more charts.
Yeah, please continue. Very good.
So just the next page, page 11, is more an educational chart. And it is an illustration of a truism that institutional investors, all investors have. It comes right out of financial economics. And that is that the less risk you take, the lower your return is likely to be, certainly over any period of time. So this is called the capital markets line. And you can look at that by looking to the far left. The cash, low duration fixed income are at the bottom end. There's not a lot of risk associated with them. And guess what? There's not a lot of return over time associated with them either. If you go to the far right, what do you see? You see private equity, you see emerging markets, you see international small cap equity, you see higher risk asset classes, i.e. higher volatility associated with them. But over time, they tend to have to return more to investors because of investors having to take on that risk. The next page, I'll simply say correlation is more important than people give it credit for. One of the things that I think has made your portfolio so successful is that you have highly diversified it. In years in which equity has taken off and other asset classes have been left behind, it doesn't seem like diversification matters. But when you look over any lengthy period of time, diversification lowers risk and raises compound return. Compound return or geometric return is, remember, return after the volatility penalty has been applied. And multi-asset class portfolios, by their nature, tend to have much lower volatility. I'm going to skip ahead and just show you two other slides. I'm going to page 17 because this picture is important and it is fairly easy to grasp. And it goes back to something that John mentioned, that each year, and I've mentioned, that each year you have to reset where you are based or what your forward vision is based on where you are. And what this chart says is that you take a long-term, what's called CAPE ratio. It's essentially an equity valuation measure stretching over 10 years. It's a price to earnings ratio. And the higher it is going to the right on the horizontal axis, the lower historically the next 10 years return has been. And this is part of what I talked about before, both our cautionary stance. We're not negative, but cautionary. And it also shows the effect of reversion to the mean. So when you have very low valuations, that's the left-hand cluster on the x-axis, you tend to get much higher returns. It's kind of a duh graph, but it basically says that when the PE ratio of the trailing 10 years, we call it the CAPE ratio, is in the 10 to 20 range, you can get pretty decent equity returns. But when it pushes way out and you're sitting on highly valued equity markets, your expectations for the next 10 years, if you were to only go by market history, have to be somewhat curbed. I'm going to do the same chart for fixed income on page 19, and then I'm going to conclude. And you note that I said earlier, fixed income is somewhat more predictable, particularly the longer duration fixed income. And in this case, what you see is that the higher yield you start with at the current point, the more likely it is you're going to get a good return over the subsequent 10 years. But when you have very low yields, and your bond yields are stuck there until those bonds mature and you roll them over, you tend to have lower expectations for the next 10 years worth of return. And so, we're looking right now at, as I said earlier, fixed income market that from an absolute yield point of view is more or less in balance. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope this gave you a sense of both the seriousness with which we take these capital market assumptions, the humility that we have in understanding that you're not going to be right all the time, but you do want to have as much relative accuracy as you can, because what emerges from these is an asset allocation that is the driver of your return and your risk, far more so than any of your managers could ever affect. So I'm going to stop there, and I don't know if John wants to add anything to my comments. I'm happy to have him chime in.
Nope, I think you did good, Jim. Thanks.
So on the S&P 500, the CAPE ratios, obviously you look at that chart, and historically, if as of D's 2025 or 38.9, anything in that ballpark has had, a negative return over the next 10 years. I mean, is the justification for continuing to allocate into that sector effectively that, well, 38.9 isn't the highest CAPE ratio historically seen, nor is there a necessarily a, you know, hard line top end. Is it more of a, you know, these could continue to improve and before they potentially correct and revert to the mean? Or I guess, you know, obviously off the chart, it's, you know, apparent that you shouldn't expect a positive return over the next 10 years.
Yeah, by the numbers, I would agree. And that should be the expectation. But all it would take is a 15% correction in the market over the course of, say, between now and next January to at least modestly change that point of view. And so we don't want to abandon the number one return engine over the long period of time simply because at the moment, you know, the historical stats are not particularly conducive. But it is a pretty strong argument that says you should be very careful about letting your equity allocation get too high. And things could change. I mean, there are things that can change the marketplace. AI is an example. We don't know what the effects might be on equity, for example. You know, these kinds of things, a detente between the US and China could materially affect that. So, you know, we want to be careful about not betting the ranch positively or negatively, but it is a pretty strong signal about where your expectations would be and the directionality that would be counter to what at least the historical stats are telling us. So I'll stop there. I hope that's responsive, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions for Jim?
I've got a question actually, and forgive me, I had to alt tab for a minute. If we go back to page 12 of the correlation matrix, what is your thinking? You know, I hear a lot like in down markets, everything gets correlated. And what is if we already discussed that while I was alt tab, please forgive me, but I was just curious, Jim, your thinking around, let's say if the market goes down, how do those correlations look? Or how static are those correlations? In your opinion?
They're not static, but in all but one situation, I think that comment that we often hear, gee, all correlations go to one, only matters with respect to funds that have a serious problem with downside risk. Insurance plans, for example, if their surplus gets too low, they can be shut down.
Sure.
That's not true with pension plans. Hedge funds, they can go bust. And so they do, that's essentially a VAR analysis. So it is true that in crises, we do see correlations come together. So for example, in our asset liability studies, we run stress tests that ask the question, what happens if all correlations go to one? So it's not an irrelevant question, but it is irrelevant in the long run because every single instance that we've had of that, those correlations have gone to unity or something close to it, and then relatively quickly returned at least toward normal. The one exception, I would say, is inflation. And you got a good taste of that in 2022. And the reason that it is so such an important lesson is that the correlation between the two most important asset classes, fixed income and equity, both suffered at the same time because that is the nature. That's what inflation does. And that's why you've heard me say at board meetings, if you ever wanted to see a corrosive environment for institutional investing, high and rising inflation is it. And 2022 is a perfect example of that. So there, you know, you had a fairly sustained correlation between fixed income and equity, unfortunately on the downside because inflation was rising. And that's why inflation is just poison to asset or to multi-asset class funds. Is that helpful?
Thank you, sir.
I'm done, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Jim. Any other questions? All right, Dan, on to the last item, recap of the staff to-do list.
Okay, we have a loan committee meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. on April 30th. We'll get the notice and materials resent to all board members, but particularly member Kober, Milanovic, and Bennett today. The May meeting is Wednesday, May 20th. It is one of our busiest meetings of the year. We will have our governance policy statement review. We do have a number of them to come before you. Peg and I will bring you the budget proposal for the next fiscal year. You will get Ethan's real estate asset class review. We have the presentation on the Montana buildings, our relationship as a landlord tenant. Budget status update for the fiscal year, quarterly reports, and a very busy HR committee. Anything the board needs from staff between now and then, and next Thursday?
Paid vacation.
Paid vacations, okay, yes, court will definitely need one.
I'm kidding.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, sounds good. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining.